At 36, I learned a brutal truth. The cheapest word my father ever uttered in his entire life to describe me was pathetic. 13 years. 13 years of waking up when it was pitch black. Of grueling deployments that drained every ounce of strength. Of sleepless night classes. All just to earn the gold oak leaf pinned to my collar. Major in the United States Army. When I called to invite my family to my small ceremony, my father did not even bother pretending to think about it. He hung up. My mother smoothed it over, patching things up with soothing words like she had done her whole life. As for my brother, he was dead silence. So there I stood in a conference room with an ugly patterned carpet surrounded by people who shared none of my blood. Sergeant Ruiz, a quiet soldier, stepped up to do the job that tradition dictated should be done by a loved one. He pinned the badge to my collar. The metal was freezing, the bone-chilling cold of an object left bare in an open box all morning. I stared at the 2 empty chairs in the front row. I had saved them, not out of hope, but out of habit. The party ended. People patted my shoulder to congratulate me. I smiled and replied, but my eyes remained glued to the phone lying face up next to the napkins. Not a single message, not a single call. I told myself I was fine. Steadiness and numbness are 2 completely different things, and I have never allowed myself to confuse them. I slipped the spare badge into my pocket and drove back to the base alone. The silence in the car shrieked. That silence had taken root in me a long time ago. My father, a former first sergeant with a myriad of harsh prejudices, in his eyes, officers were useless paper pushers. And when his daughter became an acquisition officer overseeing contracts, he saw it as a betrayal. Pathetic, he said, over the phone when I invited him to the ceremony. My mother called back that night not to apologize. In my house, apologies were a foreign currency no one bothered to hoard. She called to manage the damage. She told me not to make things hard on my father, not to show off. My mother was a peacekeeper, and the cheapest way to keep a difficult man calm is to never show him anything worth being jealous of. Unlike me, Dylan, my brother, 3 years, my junior was the family's true investment. He was a liaison for a defense subcontractor. Millions of dollars, massive pickup trucks, luxurious vacations. That was the only language my father respected. At the dinner table, my father always steered every conversation toward Dylan's deals. My job, meanwhile, was always the uninvited guest, sitting silently at the corner of the table. I was used to swallowing everything. The understanding one is always the one who suffers the most. But I had started to smell the rot from Dylan's money. The watch he wore at Thanksgiving, I accidentally saw its price at an airport once and I had to put it down immediately. A liaison salary is good, but it is not good enough to throw money out the window like that. Everything changed because of a single photo. 2 weeks after the ceremony, the local paper published a picture of me walking at the Pentagon, flanked by 2 men in black suits. The sloppy journalism called them my bodyguards. In a small town, photos like that spread faster than any correction. Suddenly, the pathetic paper pushing daughter transformed into a powerful figure, and then my phone rang, 6 a.m, the golden hour for bad news. The word mom appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice, took a deep breath, and answered. My mother's voice was sweet, fake, filled with a new and terrifying warmth. She wanted a family meeting. After months of throwing me in the dark, now they wanted a family meeting. A text from my father flew in right after. Good morning, sweetheart. Sweetheart, I read it 3 times. My father only used that word with waitresses when he needed extra napkins. Then came my sister-in-law, Brooke, sending a picture of my 6-year-old nephew holding a scribble. He keeps asking when Aunt Nora is coming. Suffocating, breathless. When people who have ignored you for years suddenly embrace you, within 48 hours, a fool believes it is a miracle, but a wise person knows it is a script. Something of theirs was on fire, and they suddenly remembered I owned a water hose. The answer was thrown right in my face at my desk. The name of Dylan's subcontractor company sat prominently in a federal investigation file that fell squarely under my office's oversight jurisdiction. My heart skipped a beat. The floor seemed to tilt a few degrees. I did not touch that file, did not open it, did not read a single line further. I knew exactly what was happening. My family did not want to find their daughter. They wanted the powerful woman with bodyguards from the photo. They wanted me to intervene. I did not drown in tears or self-pity. I took action. I called Captain Holloway, a JAG officer. I asked her if an oversight officer discovers a family member is involved in a case under her control, what must she do? She answered bluntly to recuse myself immediately. File a written report to your superiors. And if anyone, including family, asks you to use your power to intervene, you must report that too. No exceptions. That night I sat under the dim yellow light in my kitchen. I took out the only thing I always cherished, my grandfather's letter. The farmer's careful handwriting read that rank can be pinned on and taken off. Integrity is the only thing they cannot reassign. People who truly love you will never make you trade your honesty for a place in the family. I folded the letter, slipping it into my jacket pocket. I knew what I had to do. Firm and cold, without hesitation, on Monday morning, I filed a formal recusal from all matters related to that company. Attached was a detailed report about my family's intention to force me to interfere with a federal investigation. I single-handedly stripped myself of all authority over the case, slammed every door shut. I cleansed myself. They thought I was a life preserver, but I had drained my own air supply. Saturday, I drove 2 hours home, no uniform. I wore jeans and a regular jacket. The inside pocket held my grandfather's letter. The passenger seat held a brown manila folder, a copy of the recusal declaration. I pulled the car into the garage. The familiar smell of burnt coffee hit my nose, mixed with the pungent, greasy scent of motor oil. The smell of childhood. For the first time, it made me nauseous, stepping into the house. The scene was absurdly warm. My father stood up to greet me, a blooming smile on his lips. My mother brought out my favorite high school casserole. Dylan sat there visibly thinner, his crooked smile not reaching his eyes. Brooke clutched the boy tightly on her lap, using him as a cheap stage prop. I sat down, placed the brown folder neatly in front of me, and rested my hands on it. The feast began. After a few bland opening remarks, Dylan broke down. He confessed he was under federal investigation. He used every excuse, technical errors, everyone does it. The government does not understand how business works. I stayed silent. My father lost his patience. He lunged forward, revealing his true colors. You work at the Pentagon. You know these people. Make a phone call. Stall them. Set things up for your brother. Family comes first, right? Brooke added a sickly, sweet stab that family has to take care of each other. I looked at them, an absolute emptiness and silence enveloped my mind. They were asking me to obstruct justice. They were asking me to commit a federal crime, all to buy a seat built on lies at this dining table. I looked directly into each of their eyes. My voice was steady, cold as ice. I asked them to listen carefully, that they were asking me to use my position to interfere with a federal investigation to bury this case. Is that right? My father snapped, saying it was helping the family. I shook my head. That is obstruction of justice. It is a crime, not for Dylan, but for me. Dylan panicked, trying to cram in temptations that it is just one phone call, no one will know. E smile, a bitter smile. I will know, and the people whose job is to catch those who pull these stunts will know too. At this point, the true darkness descended. The edges of the masks tore away. My father went insane. He threw his arms up, screaming about the effort of raising me, about ingratitude, about blood debts. My mother sobbed, playing the peace anthem. They backed me into a corner. It was time to end the play. I pushed the brown folder to the middle of the table. Abrupt. Dede. Its weight seemed to crush the entire room. I declared loudly. The very next day after Mom called, I filed a report. I officially and completely recused myself from this case. I have no right to see, no right to touch anything related to Dylan. And I also reported in writing that this family was trying to instigate me to interfere with the investigation. The room shattered. The thick silence was ripped apart by the sound of chairs crashing down. My father sprang up, face, red neck veins bulging. He cursed. He called me a traitor, a venomous snake, a bastard. Dylan screamed that I had single-handedly destroyed his life. My sister-in-law hugged my nephew tight, wailing loudly, pointing the spear directly at me, screaming that I was robbing a child of his father. Terrified, the boy shrieked at the hideous faces of the adults themselves. I stood up, putting my coat on. I was frighteningly calm. My father roared, ordering me to sit down. I stopped at the door, turned around. I threw his ultimate weapon back at him. Do you remember what you said when I invited you to my promotion ceremony? You said you would not waste your time on my pathetic ceremony. Yes, I also will not waste my integrity to cover up this garbage. So now we are even. I looked at my mother, the woman who spent her whole life lowering my temperature to keep the man from combusting. Mom, a peace built on my silence was never peace at all. It just meant it was my turn to lose. I walked out the door, took a deep breath. The air was crystal clear. I did not look back. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. The time that followed passed as slowly and ruthlessly as reality does. The indictment was unsealed. Dylan took a plea deal to avoid a trial. The consequences were his own, brought upon himself. As for me, because I was transparent from the start, my career was completely unharmed. My superiors quietly noted my clean handling of the situation. I kept my job, kept my rank, and most importantly, kept my integrity. My family stopped calling me. That distance was not a wound, it was necessary. Breathing room. A few weeks after that fateful day, my squad dragged me out to a small diner. Sergeant Ruiz raised his glass, made a crude but sincere joke, and I laughed until tears streamed down my face. That was my real family. That night when I got home, I took the gold oak leaf out of the drawer. It was not cold anymore. I placed it on the shelf right next to my grandfather's letter. The greatest promotion of my life was not on my collar. It was the quiet morning when I stopped letting people who did not value me dictate my self-worth.